In this update, I added a new hot pumpkin turret. I wanted to get a flamethrower in the game and felt like this was very Halloween appropriate. The turret spits fire at enemies and hits all enemies in an area. It is very effective against flying enemies and enemies that are weak against fire. I wanted each of the turrets in the last couple updates to use a different approach to kind of damaging the enemies or using different Unity systems. So the Ballista uses the particle system for damage, and the cannon and the pumpkins both use the particle system for some of their effects. And I'll go through each of these and kind of touch on the high points of how they operate. If you look at the particle system for the Ballista, you'll see that it just uses a stretched version of the default particle. You can set this up by setting the render mode to stretched billboard and then changing some of the settings in here. If you want to use an actual material like an arrow, you can also do that, but for now it looked fine to me and it kind of got the point across. So the other big thing to note in here is that collision is turned on, and this allows you to attach a script to the particle that lets it do damage on collision. If we jump over to the code, you'll see that on the awake function for each turret, it checks if a projectile particle system is attached, and if it is, it will add this additional script to the particle system. Going into this script, there's some commented code here that I was experimenting with, but the core of it is that on collision with any other object, it checks if it's a character, as well as some other criteria for dealing damage, and if those criteria are met, then it will deal damage to whatever the particle hits. I actually used an excellent YouTube video as a tutorial for this, so I will link that in the description. When putting the pumpkin turret together, I initially tried to use the particle system as well for the damage, but it ended up looking kind of weird. The particles weren't going through things how I expected them to, so everything in front of the pumpkin wasn't getting damaged, and I ended up using a slightly different approach that I think turned out a lot better. The pumpkin flame effect uses a looping particle system that does not deal damage. I used another video to put this together, so I'll link that in the description too. For this one, the damage is calculated by checking a capsule collider in front of the pumpkin on an interval. So the start of the capsule is directly in front of the pumpkin, and the end is whatever the attack range is set to. So the way that works is that on whatever the fire rate interval is set to, this capsule is checked to see if any enemies are inside, and those enemies are applied a set amount of fire damage. The last turret I want to touch on is the frost cannon, and if you look here, you can see that the explosion particle effect starts on the cannon itself. In-game, the way this works is that the location of the particle system is moved to whatever the cannon's target is and played at that location. Simultaneously, an overlap sphere is created at that point, and any enemies that are near the target enemy are also included in that sphere and take the damage the same as the primary target. I'm not going to go through too much of the code this time as it is a little dry, but you can see that I've added turret types that deal with these different ways of applying the damage. I will make sure that this code is open source again, and if you have any questions, please reach out to me on Discord, and I'm happy to talk through any of this or answer any questions. I'd also like to mention that the pumpkin head as well as some of the other decorations around me are from the mod Hallowheim, which is also pretty neat. I'll link that in the description as well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the flamethrower and found some of this interesting. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.